Morning, everyone. Happy half term and welcome again. And welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by Associate Editor and my fellow Mirror columnist, Kevin Maguire. Morning, Kevin.
Good morning.
Sorry, everybody, that we're a little bit late this morning. I'm afraid MI5 was trying to get onto the call at Kevin's end. They're in Parliament. They're not happy with anything we're doing. And probably the topic we're talking about today may be the reason why. So what have we got to discuss? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the £12 million deal that Prince Andrew has struck with Virginia Giuffre, the woman who is suing him for allegations of rape and sexual assault that she says took place 21 years ago after she was pimped out to him by her abuser, Jeffrey Epstein, and his girlfriend, the now convicted sex trafficker, Ghislaine Maxwell. Our favourite person, of course. The deal includes $10 million for her and £2 million for an abuse charity that Virginia now runs. In the past few months, the figure of $14 million has been bandied about in newspaper reports, so perhaps he's haggled her down a bit for that. But as Eddie from Walthamstow said to me on Twitter this morning, Kevin, the Queen helping to settle her son's sexual abuse case with taxpayer money would be the end of the monarchy in any sane country. So, Kevin, tell us, what have we got for our cash?
Yeah, probably should. Let's see what happens here. I think the royal family is doing more to end the monarchy than any Republican, including me. What do we get for our cash? Well, you got to remember that Prince Andrew was claiming he'd never met this woman, that he didn't know anything about her, that he would fight it in court to clear his name, and then he pays out 12 million pounds, 10 million to her, we believe, 2 million to her charity. The court of public opinion is going to make up its own mind, and he's now forever a tainted slime ball. And it's how the royal family actually deal with him, what the Queen does, I think, using her money, a lot of it public money that she gets to cover his costs, will really stick in the throat to many people. They might say, well, look, she's a mother, but she's the head of state. What do Charles and William do when they come through later with him? Because I'm sure he'll want to come back into public life in some way. I think he should be locked in the tower and the key thrown away, because there's no way you can rebuild this man's reputation. So there are loads of issues, but it gets right to the root of why do we have a monarchy? Why do we elevate one family above all other families in the country? They're always there as head of state. And yet you find out they've got some really, really bad rotten apples.
Yeah, and as Kim Selby says there, it's a disgrace. And there's also an argument, Kevin, isn't there, that if the reason they may be fine people if they weren't in a monarchy, but once you make a monarchy and they have a lifetime of people toadying to them and huge wealth and huge privilege and access to all kinds of things, and people desperately trying to sleep with them for all kinds of different reasons, you do end up making some bad apples, perhaps. Now, Mike Holden says, should we see it as a huge charitable act by Prince Andrew to give millions of pounds to someone he's never met, especially as he did suggest that she had faked a photograph of them together? Now, we've got to read out the statement from the palace, because there's a couple of things that are interesting here. And this is the joint statement that was put out by Virginia Giuffre and Prince Andrew's lawyers yesterday in court. Virginia Giuffre and Prince Andrew have reached an out-of-court settlement. The parties will file a dismissal upon her claim. The sum's not being disclosed, but we know anyway. Prince Andrew intends to make a substantial donation to Miss Giuffre's charity in support of victims' rights. Prince Andrew has never intended to malign Miss Giuffre's character and accepts that she has both suffered both as an established victim of abuse and as a result of unfair public attacks. Prince Andrew regrets his association with Epstein and commends the bravery of Miss Giuffre and other survivors in standing up for themselves and others. He pledges to demonstrate his regret for his association with Epstein by supporting the fight against the evils of sex trafficking and by supporting its victims. Now, that's all well and good, and that's obviously been agreed by both sides, but there's a couple of things of interest in there, Kevin. The first is his claim that he never intended to malign her character, just accidentally instructed his lawyers to do exactly that for him when they accused her of lying, of only being in it for the money, of the fact that she has helped recruit some other girls as part of her abuse, therefore meant that she had unclean hands in legal terms. And secondly, that Prince Andrew now regrets his association with Jeffrey Epstein. And it's known that he trafficked countless young girls over years. That's something he never said in public. It was something he was invited to say in that interview with Emily Maitlis, and he didn't. And it begs the question, doesn't it really, as Mrs. Merton might ask, what first attracted Andrew to the friendship of a billionaire paedophile and his girlfriend, the now convicted sex trafficker and procuress, and the fact they were surrounded by young girls? What did he think was going on, for goodness sake?
Yeah, I said, well, maybe it was the privilege and entitlement he was born into and he's lived with all his life that he thought all these very, very young women actually found him really attractive. I think it was just this expectation that he could do and have whatever he liked, and he fell in with Epstein because it was very convenient, and that he was given accommodation in the States and taken on trips, and seems to have had these women given to himself, and he's never once stopped to wonder what was going on, or he looked the other way. Whichever is the explanation, neither is acceptable. Both are indefensible, and he's now paying a price for it. But you're quite right. In that 2019 interview with Emily Maitlis on the BBC, he said he didn't regret his relationship with Epstein. And when he was asked why he'd returned to spend time with a man who was a convicted sex offender, he said, well, it was the honourable thing to do. I'm pretty honourable. I mean, it is all stomach churning. It is absolutely stomach churning. And he's squirming and wriggling even now after a grovelling, humiliating climb down by the Duke of Shame, who's been forced to eat a lot of his words. But he was dragging an acknowledged victim of sex trafficking. He was dragging her through the mud. And he tried, let's not forget, to have the case thrown out on the very dodgy grounds that she'd reached a financial settlement in 2009, I recall it was, with Epstein, in which then she was paid $500,000 for the harm and distress and indignity she'd suffered. That's about £370,000. Prince Andrew has paid out many times that to avoid being quizzed in a US court.
Yeah, exactly. Now, get into the comments, ask us your questions. What do you think about Prince Andrew's out-of-court settlement? Try and remember to the legalities of the situation, please, everybody. Illegal ones aren't going to be put up on screen. He's not admitted guilt, but as Kevin says, he has paid £12 million, which is a lot of money for something that you didn't do and someone you say you didn't meet. Now, Joan Leary says, if he returns to public life and Camilla becomes queen, do you think the public would say enough's enough and this could be the end of the monarchy? This is all great stuff for Republicans like you, Kevin. Lots of people don't necessarily want the end of the monarchy, but do you think this is like a permanent tarnishing that they can't recover from?
I think him, yes. I think the comparing lightning in this case, Camilla, I think is wrong and unfair on her. Yep, she had an affair with Prince Charles, but they're married now. That's that's like a kind of almost, I think, a personal issue. She becomes queen. Like, I'm a Republican, and I don't care about that. In fact, I think if Diana would have become queen, I think Camilla should become queen. I just think that's the way that system would work. I think it's a lunatic, Ruritanian, medieval, antiquated system that should be out. But I think it's Andrew that shows why the system is rotten, not Camilla. But I think Andrew himself, if they have any attempt to rehabilitate him and somehow after a few years try and funnel them back into public life in little ways, I think they'd be making a huge mistake, and people will just be revolted at that, and there'd be a backlash. Now, at the end of next month, there is a service in Westminster Abbey for his dad, Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. He'll go to that, but he should be lurking in the background in a dark coat, hat pulled over his eyes, collar turned up, and the other should have
looking really innocent.
Yeah, well, looking what he is. Just like
looking at the back in a dirty raincoat. Okay.
That settlement. I think the court of public opinion knows what that means, despite his protestations of innocence. People are not daft; they don't want to be taken for fools. And the monarchy, if it's going to exist and survive, never mind thrive, they've got to behave well. You've got to behave well, and I'm afraid there is no question that he has behaved badly, and how he's conducted this case, what happened in the first place, and he's had to do a complete U-turn because he knew he's going to face a day of judgment in that court. It's a civil case, but he was going to be quizzed and grilled.
Yeah, there's no good way for him to come out of that court case. Even had he won it, he was still friends with a billionaire and a sex trafficker, and that was still a victim of abuse that he dragged through the mud. Even if the judge had ruled that she had no connection with Prince Andrew at all and was making that bit up, still really grim and horrible. And just royals going into the witness box. I think the last one was one of Queen Victoria's sons, maybe with the 7th when he was still Prince of Wales, and it doesn't go down well at all. No. But lots of our viewers seem to be agreeing with you, Kevin. We've taken some of those comments down about Linda, Jeanette, Thomas, all wanting to abolish the monarchy and start again. Lorna says, we need a referendum on the royals. I think today might be the wrong day to hold one, Lorna, but there's probably an argument for that. Justin says £12 million for a pizza. That is, he said, is all he shared. Well, he went to Pizza Express, some price for a topping. Now, that was, of course, Prince Andrew's excuse was that he was at Pizza Express in the night in question. But, it's worth pointing out as well, as I think you referred to earlier on, Kevin, that Prince Andrew was a divorced man in his 40s at the time these things allegedly took place in 2001. She was a young woman of 17. Yeah. He says he can't remember meeting her, but if reports of Epstein's lifestyle are correct, there would have been quite a lot of young women he would have met in the company of Jeffrey Epstein, so perhaps they do all tend to blur into one with the passage of time. Anne Neville says, where do the royal family get their wealth from? Why should they be able to throw more than 10 million to save his neck? They get their wealth from us, Anne, from the Crown Estate, and a deal that was struck, I think, George III, with the Crown Estate, which said that we'll give them some money to keep them independent of Parliament and governments, if you like, which was a good idea to some extent. But of course, the Queen has since made a lot of money on wind farms because she owns all the coastline. So she keeps getting a pay rise and we keep getting inflation. Brenda says, so who actually paid her off, Andrew or the Queen? We're never going to know the real details, are we, Kevin? But we do know that Prince Andrew's got a Royal Navy pension of about 30 grand a year. So it's probably not him.
He also, his mother gets what's called a sovereign grant, which is well into 8 figures, and he gets £250,000 from that. So I feel like he's been allowed to keep the Duke of York, the Duke of Shame title. Like it's unbelievable. But I think getting to the bottom of how much the Queen paid and what she contributed will take some time. But I wouldn't be surprised if it came out, because these things normally do. It's just how long. And I do believe we have a public right to know. And there was no privacy in this case when the Queen, and it's not her as an individual, I have huge sympathy in many ways for her as an elderly woman, and you have a son who is being this sordid case. It must be pretty awful for her, particularly when she's lost her husband not so very long ago. But because she's head of state, the hereditary monarch, I think we should know how much that institution, which we fund and we're supposed to look up to, or at least tolerate, how much has been paid to bail him out, to get him out of this. Now he's selling his chalet in Switzerland. I think it was about 17 million quid it was worth, but there was a mortgage on it around 6 million. So maybe some of that money is being used. But I think it's a matter of public interest and concern if the Queen has paid to settle a sex abuse case against her son.
Exactly. We may well see something in the royal accounts when they get published, but then again, we may not. But we do know that the American end of this, the lawyers are a lot more chatty and a lot less respectful of the monarchy than our end. So perhaps we will end up hearing at some point or another. Now, keep giving us your comments. What do you think about? Did Andrew have any choice? Should he have done this? Because the alternative would have been a trial in the middle of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee year. Now, on pages 6 and 7, our colleague Russell Myers is reporting on how, would you believe it, friends of the Prince are working to rehabilitate him in the style of John Profumo, the cabinet minister who was caught sharing a girlfriend with a Russian diplomat at the height of the Cold War in the 60s. But of course, Christine Keeler, the lady in that case, didn't accuse John Profumo of rape and wasn't underage in her home state at the time of the allegations. But Kevin, there's a lot of optimism, it would seem, from Andrew's camp that this can all blow over somehow. In your experience, can a scandal that's been a public sore, a running sore for the past decade, it was 2010, early 2011, this all came out to start with, and which arguably Andrew has made worse every single time there's been a development. Can that ever blow over?
Foxy, no. It's the nature of the case involving exploitation of a young woman involving sex. If he'd been in a fight with another bloke or something, or he nicked a car or whatever, you might see how he could be rehabilitated down the line, but not the nature of this crime, because it's so revolting. So I think that is it. But if he's friends, if he is sitting feeling sorry for himself, thinking a few years' time I can come back somehow, I'll do a few good works here and there, and then I'll be accepted, I'll slime my way back onto the balcony at Buckingham Palace for big occasions. I think one, he's wrong, making a big mistake. But two, if the Queen, God bless her, won't be here forever. But if she or Charles, who follows her, or William, who follows him, if any of them do it, they'll be tainted too, because he's going to remain absolutely toxic. John Profumo went off to the East End of London, and he did good deeds working with people who were poor and disadvantaged for decades, shunning publicity. I think, as you say, totally different case. In a case that perhaps he shouldn't have done what he did and so on, but he probably wouldn't resign now in the shameless politics we have. But a totally different case to Prince Andrew, who in truth wasn't that liked anyway because of his behaviour. But then the more you learn, the more you are revolted. So no, he should be finished. And the royals will be absolutely mad. It will be a Republican dream to try and bring him back and put an arm around him. Look, dodgy, weird, unsavoury, nasty Uncle Andrew is a problem they're going to have to deal with. And the way to deal with it is to completely shun him and push him in a corner, and don't apologise for him. Don't try and defend him, because he's not worth it.
No, it'd be interesting perhaps to compare at some point if this wasn't a prince who had been accused of these things, and they are still allegations where he's not admitted liability, I should point out, then if this was a case, if this case had happened in Rochdale rather than on a private island in the Caribbean, if it had happened but with a girl who had been taken out of very dodgy foster homes, for example, rather than into multi-millionaire mansions and pads, then we wouldn't even be discussing rehabilitating the man who is sent to those allegations, especially if he's paid someone a huge amount of money to be quiet.
Yeah, Foxy, you're absolutely right. But those who are privileged and have incredibly deep pockets think they can buy their way out and then worm their way back in. Perhaps that's what he is thinking. Perhaps that's what he will do. And there'll be some people watching. I think there'll be a minority, but they'll probably feel sympathetic, or they might even support him. They might be joining in the campaign of smearing and vilifying his victim. They might be saying, well, she said she wouldn't do a deal. And she has, yeah. But, Foxy, you will know, because I don't want to mansplain this. For a woman to go through a case like that when she's been abused and sex trafficked, it's emotionally and mentally traumatic. Her lawyers would also be advising her what she could hope to achieve if the civil case had gone to its conclusion. And I suspect financially, and in terms of the statement, it would be very similar to the deal that has been reached. It's just that Andrew has managed to save himself the ordeal of being grilled by Emily Maitlis with knobs on if the lawyers had got to him and had used that interview and everything that had been said and all the other evidence. And I was just reading today that photograph of Andrew with Virginia Roberts, as she then was, and Ghislaine Maxwell, which his people were saying it might be fake, it may not be true. Ghislaine Maxwell said it came out in emails that it was probably true, that and accurate, that picture, and it hadn't been faked the way they pretended. I think the body of evidence was just building and building and building against him, and all those dodgy routes he went down to try and stop the legal action, they all failed. His strategy was very underhand, and it's pretty contemptuous, and he's getting his just desserts. He is reaping what he sowed.
Well, and also, let's look at the bright side here, Kevin. There's a good object lesson for everyone accused of anything at any point in the future, whether they're a 3-year-old or a 43-year-old, and how not to handle it, especially never mind the millions they must have wasted on legal fees. Now, we do have some good news coming up, which we're going to discuss in a minute, but get into the comments, ask us your questions. What do you think about Andrew's settlement? Do you feel sympathy for him? Did he have any option? Does this, do you still think that he may be innocent as a result of all this? Because there's no acceptance of it or admission of guilt or anything like that, or even that he did have sex with Virginia. That's still something that he denies. But you would think, wouldn't you, that with a £12 million settlement, there might be enough evidence there for the Metropolitan Police to reopen their investigation that they never really opened in the first place. But, they don't investigate things in the past. So that's that, isn't it? Now, we do have some good news, and here it is. Now, I was tempted, very, very tempted, Kevin, to have as our good news today the revelation that Novak Djokovic might not be gracing Wimbledon with his presence, but I decided that was too cynical. So instead, here is the story of Brian Kendrick, an 80-year-old widower who pitched up at the Emporium nightclub in Colville in Leicestershire. He bought a pint, he mingled with clubbers before being pictured there at the foot of the staircase. He's there on the right. And that staircase is where 61 years earlier he had met his late wife, Barbara, and fell madly in love with her. Now, when the club realised this, they unveiled a plaque on that staircase commemorating their meeting in 1961. Now, Kev, I don't know what Brian's hearing is like, but I'm assuming at 80 in a nightclub, he either took his hearing aid out or couldn't hear the din anyway. But is this a sign, do you think, that, you're only as old as you feel on the inside, whatever has happened to your extremities?
Yeah, like old rockers never stop, do they? They go on and on. But this is just an absolutely gorgeous story. I love it. I felt quite teary when I first read it. And love never dies.
You soft-hearted devil, you. You've been sitting there ranting.
No, but some things, they just touch you. And he went back, and the plaque has a red rose on it, because when he first set his eyes on the love of his life, she was wearing a long red dress with a rose attached. That kind of dates it. I don't see anybody with going out clubbing now with flowers attached to their dresses or their suits. But him going back, and it's the Emporium nightclub in Colville in Leicestershire. And I think, they put up that plaque, and I just think it's a really, really nice gesture, because of course he's clearly suffering after losing his wife, Barbara. And I think, Brian, good for you going there. I'm surprised to let you in. Did they say, are you somebody's dad or granddad? Have you come to collect somebody?
Get past the doorman. Exactly. Some of us can get past the doorman. They let in 80-year-old in.
He looks pretty good for it.
Yeah, my mum and dad met in a nightclub. I think it's the Roxy now, but it was called something else in East Grinstead, and I don't think they'd ever want to go back there again because of all that dush 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 music. I don't like that. But well done, Brian, for going back there, and commiserations over losing your wife. But hopefully it will be commemorated forever from now on. Now let's have a quick wrap up of our Prince Andrew questions before we call it quits. Les Kent says, let's make it a bit more democratic. Should there not be a referendum to see if the people want to keep the monarchy? Firstly, isn't it high time for them also to distance themselves from blood sports? Les, the things they should be distancing themselves from is growing. It's a huge list. But I don't think they're going to distance themselves from the one bit of pleasure they have in life still in their golden cage. But it's worth saying, though, isn't it, Kevin? Pamela's story. What's her story? How did she end up there? I think you're talking about Virginia. And she ended up there because she was recruited and groomed by Maxwell and Epstein, fundamentally. But it's worth saying that, Kevin, the problem we've got with the monarchy, whether you like the Queen or whether you don't like the Queen or the idea of a monarchy, is that we have these people, a family, who are locked away in a golden cage. They can't come out in public, pretty much, except to wave. And they have the money of millionaires, but they want and need the privacy, security, and lifestyle of billionaires. And that means they are always going to be susceptible to rich people buying them, offering them stuff, tempting them with things. Harry and Meghan proved it. They cannot live on 14, 20 million quid they've inherited from Princess Diana. They have to have multi-millions. They have to have billionaire friends to fund that kind of lifestyle because we insist they have to have that kind of lifestyle. That's
Foxy, multi-millionaires and billionaires want to collect them like baubles and have them around and show them off and flaunt friendships. And then they go around hanging out with these people with private jets and incredible lifestyles, and they want the lifestyles. And so then they get chased for the money, and then you get compromised, and it becomes incredibly messy and horrible. And we've seen how sordid it can become with Prince Andrew.
Yeah, and it always in history has always proven that the monarch does okay because they have all the money, but it's the rest of the family that don't have access to the cash that have these problems. And it's gone back to before the Wars of the Roses. I think William the Conqueror's brother had the same issues. So it's just what's going to happen. I think if we have a royal family, we either have to suck it up or find a new way of doing it. Barbara says, and this is a good quote to end on, there's always been the same: one law for the rich and another for the poor. Let's wait and see if the Lord does anything for Andrew, shall we? Thanks for joining us, Kevin. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you again next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Bye-bye.